What's up guys, Lynn from LH Productions here. Today I'm going to talk to you about 3 easy things you need to master to take better photos or video. Let's get into it. The first thing I think about when I'm taking photo or video is whether or not the shot that I'm trying to get is exposed correctly. I look at the brightest part of the frame. If I want it to be absolutely perfect on exposure, I'm going to make sure, do I want that to be blown out? Do I want that to be the brightest point? Or is there something else I'm trying to achieve? What do I want it to look like? We'll get into that part a little bit later on. There are 3 things on your camera that are going to affect your exposure. That's going to be the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed. ISO is going to measure how much light your sensor is going to be sensitive to. The higher the ISO, the brighter the image. You want to try to keep your ISO generally as low as possible to prevent the image from looking really noisy, especially if you're shooting in a low light situation. I try to keep mine as low as possible. The second thing is shutter speed. Shutter speed is going to be how long your sensor is actually exposed to light. If you're shooting something that's really quick, like sports or cars, anything that is fast movement, you want to have a high shutter speed. The less time your sensor is exposed to the light, the less motion blur you're going to have in your shot. An example of when you want a low shutter speed is if you're doing a long exposure. Say for instance, you're wanting to take a photo of a city block. Well, instead of just having cars in that photo, sitting there driving by like you would if you had a high shutter speed, if you do a low shutter speed, you can get artifacts known as light streaks. The slower the frame rate, the more light streak you're going to see. The last thing that I think about when I'm exposing my photos is the f-stop or aperture. The f-stop determines how much light your actual lens is going to let hit your sensor or your film. It's denoted in an F/ and then a number. The lower that number, the more light is going to get in. But there's also another effect. The background of a subject can be blurry or it can be out of focus a little bit. Well, the subject is actually in focus. The f-stop determines how wide the field of focus is. The higher the f-stop, the more in focus it's going to be. The lower the f-stop, the shallower your focus is going to be. This is referred to as depth of field. A high aperture is going to be a low depth of field. A low aperture is going to be a very high depth of field, also known as deep or shallow. This segues nicely into the second thing I think about when I'm taking a photo, and that's focus. If you're shooting a landscape, you might want more to be in focus than not. That way you can get all of the itty-gritty details. If you're shooting a portrait, you might want less focus. That way you can blur out the background and those details don't become as clear. Basically, where do you want the focus to be in this frame? If you're taking a photo of a model, you don't want the background to be in focus and the model be out of focus, because that's not the interesting part of the picture. If you're doing a video, maybe the focus needs to shift in the same shot, so you can move or pull focus in the middle of the shot to make it a little more interesting and engaging. I use rack focus a lot, especially if I'm shooting products, because one, I think it looks really nice, and also you can kind of gauge where the audience is going to be paying attention. Chances are they're not going to be looking at what's out of focus, they're going to be paying more attention to what's in focus. It's really up to you. As long as you're thinking about what you want your shot to say, then you can control the focus the way you like. Some cameras will have a feature that allows you to digitally magnify your subject on the screen so you can make sure you have your focus. This is important because it's going to make sure that it's absolutely as in focus as possible. Sometimes if you're shooting a subject, you can just be a little bit off, and if you're shooting an interview, that ruins the entire interview. You don't want to be that chump that has to throw out and reshoot all this footage just because you didn't get your focus right. So always make sure to get your critical focus. The last thing that I want to talk about is the shot composition. This is more important than any of the other 2 things because overall it determines how interesting your shot is. It needs to be properly exposed and it needs to be in focus, but where things are in the frame is going to mean more for your photograph in the end. Do you want your image or video to be symmetrical? Do you want it to be dynamically symmetrical? Or do you want it to adhere to the rule of thirds? I definitely use the rule of thirds more often. What that is basically dividing each frame into 3 separate fields, vertically and horizontally. Line things up so that they're in one of those 3 fields, and it's pretty easy to get a good shot. It's a rule of thirds. They call it a rule for a reason. But rules are meant to be broken. What that means is if you see a chance for an interesting shot that's not shot in thirds, that's fine. Take that shot by all means. Photography and video is about following your gut. If you think something's going to look good, give it a shot. If it doesn't look good, don't do it again. If it does look good, well then you've got another tool in your tool belt the next time you're shooting a video or photo. But with all these tips, the most important thing is to really think about what you're doing. Think about what it says visually and how it makes you feel. If a photo that you take has an emotional effect on you, chances are it can have that same impact on somebody else. But that's it for the video today, guys. Thanks for watching till the end. If you have any questions, hit me up. Let's grab some coffee or grab a beer and we can talk about what video can do for you, or if you have any questions about filmmaking in general, how to use a camera techniques, things like that, comment below, shoot me a DM, email me, message me. I'd love to hear from you guys. This is Lynn from LH Productions. I'll see you next time.